In this episode, we're going to talk about one of my most cherished possessions growing up. That's right, my bicycle. So, stick around. Hello, fellow dorks and dorkettes, and welcome to sentiMENTAL. My name's Rob, and in this episode, we're going to talk about one of my favorite things growing up, and it was probably one of your favorite things as well, and that is a bicycle. Now, this is sentiMENTAL. This is the show where I talk about the things that are rattling around in my brain, and I gotta get them out. I have to share my memories, I have to reminisce, I have to be nostalgic, I have to be sentimental. Emphasis on the mental, because I'm a weird dude. Anyway, quick shop talk real fast. I used to paint miniatures while doing sentimentals, just so you'd have something to look at. But I'm going to go back to how I used to do them and show some stuff behind me. I looked back at my roller skating episode and I think that just looked great. So I'm going to go back to doing that again. So look forward to some rad stuff going on behind me, literally and figuratively. So, wow, where to begin? I mean, I got a bike when I was super young, and I remember riding up and down my driveway, which was just a dirt and gravel driveway. I would spend hours going back and forth, when I had my training wheels and everything. Now, just when I got a little bit older, just a wee bit older, I was able to, with supervision, usually from my grandfather, who was my next door neighbor growing up, go across the street. We had a very small shopping center there. It had a mechanic on one side. I forget what all was in it. There was a carpet store on the other side, and I forget what was inside the middle. I think there was a hairdresser. Anyway, that's not what's important to this story. But I remember riding around in their parking lot. And of course it would be a little bit later in the evening after dinner. I remember when the weather was nice, and it was getting dark out, being out there, and just loving every minute of it. So I think the adventurous side of bike riding came out when I'm not even going to venture a guess at the age, but I think I was probably 9 or 10, and I was allowed to leave the house and leave the area. And that was only to go one place. Around the bend from my house, there was a huge graveyard. And I used to ride around all the little roads and avenues within the graveyard. And that bike that I had then, I'll remember forever, and that is a Huffy Thunder. I actually spent some time looking online, and I found one. Some dude was selling it, and unfortunately it was sold by the time I found it. And if I bought it, what would I do with it? But it just was great to see that bike again. And yeah, I mean, it was black. It had like the crossbar with the 80s checkerboard motif in gold and tapered off to white in there. Yeah, I love that bike. That bike was where I started to adventure out from my house. And like I said, I began in this graveyard that was near my house. And I would ride my bike there all afternoon until it started to get really dusky outside and dark. And yeah, it got a little scary sometimes. I mean, being in a graveyard. But it was quiet. No one was driving on the streets unless they had a funeral or something, which, I mean, those were usually in the morning and I wasn't riding then. But yeah, I mean, it wasn't that far from my house, but it felt like I was on an alien world all by myself. Just me and my thoughts and my imagination, just biking around. And believe me, it's become like almost like an urban myth to younger people now. But yeah, you left the house and there was no supervision. It was just you. And if you were lucky enough, you would be able to find some like-minded people and hang out with them and ride bikes. But that didn't come till later for me. I think by the time I got to middle school, which when I think back at how old I was, I mean, in middle school you're 11 to 13, and I was still just biking around, playing with toys, being very imaginative. I mean, I don't think kids retain that as long anymore. I've talked about that before. But, I mean, I remember, maybe it was before middle school, but away from my house there was like an older part of town, very big rich houses. It was near the courthouse of our town, so everyone always said lawyers and stuff lived there. But I would bike up and down that street, the trees, like a canopy over everything. It was nice and cool and shady. And down at the end of the street, there was a big hill that went down, and my middle school was up at the top, and the big hill went down to our main street. And that hill, where the trees had grown, and I've talked about this before when I talk about megaforce, because the trees would make the sidewalk go up into ramps almost, and I would zip down this hill and hit these ramps and pretend I was in megaforce and I could fly on my bike like they did in the movie. Of course, they were on motorcycles in the movie. But yeah, I would go up and down this hill all day long. I mean, the way that the sidewalk were in those ramps, it was just perfect. And it was quiet. I mean, I talked about it in a previous sentimental from last year. I mean, I haven't done a traditional one of these in over a year. Now the cinematic heroes are part of the sentimental family, but that's a little bit different than just these talks with you all. And like I said, I hope you guys helps you guys remember these aspects of your childhood too, because I mean, honestly, that's all we have left of our childhood is knickknacks, which I'm surrounded by, and memories. So I hope you guys, if you don't have the knickknacks, I at least hope you have the memories. But anyway, as I get a little sappy there, as I said in the previous episode of growing up in a small town, it was a small town, very quiet. It's not that way nowadays. I mean, they have shopping centers everywhere, fast food everywhere, but they didn't back then. But anyway, I would just spend hours going up and down this hill, and I would go to the main street, go up and down, and hit the little shops and buy nickel and dime candies and buy Coke in a little cup like this for $0.25 at the Rexall drugstore. Spend time at the library, just park my bike outside and go in, and it's where I got a lot of my exposure to comic books, because they had graphic novels, and I would sit there and read, X-Men, the Phoenix Saga graphic novel, or the Women of Marvel graphic novel, or the Here Come the Bad Guys graphic novel from Marvel. All from Marvel. DC didn't really have a lot of graphic novels back in the day. Marvel, though, they had them all over the place. But I mean, it wasn't until middle school that I met up with another dude that lived close by, and he had a bike. I mean, I had my Huffy Thunder, but he had a mongoose, so he had some money and, had the pegs on the side and all that jive. I mean, mine was just a bike. But I don't have it close by, but part of the story was in our town there was a place called White's Bicycle, and that was one of the first places too that sold skateboards and surfing stuff. They had bikes and skateboards and surfing paraphernalia. And if you remember these G&S, Gordon and Smith, they had bracelets that were Velcro. I remember saving up money and buying one. It was gray with the G&S and white on it. And I would hang out at this bike store, and I always wanted the dice air things on your bike, covers. They had different colored dice that would screw on. I always wanted those, but I never got any. But yeah, I mean, we would ride bikes from morning till night, be all over town. Parents had no idea where we were, but we were having fun. We were being safe. I mean, that's one thing that parents trusted us to know what was right or wrong, or what was dumb, or what was not, dumb. And one thing I remember, this bank, it was on a back alley, had a embankment, and you could tell people had ridden their bikes on it for years because it had a well-worn ramp in this little embankment and going up and down that all the time. But yeah, one of my worst injuries on a bike though happened at this dude's house. He had a sidewalk that went to his front door, and at the end of it where it met the street, it had a little lip that popped up. And I remember I bicycled down that, lifted up, and my bike went flying out from under me, and I landed on my elbows and my knees. My elbows were just scratched up, but my knees looked like oysters. They were gray, mushy, full of gravel and grass and rocks. And yeah, I remember being in so much pain. I still have scars all over my knees to this day because of it. But that was the thing. You just got up, brushed yourself off, washed the gravel out, played the next day. No big deal. It wasn't like my parents. I mean, my parents were my parents, but they never were like, you can't do that anymore. It was patch them up and go back out there and do whatever. I remember when I got a little bit older, because all the big kids in movies had 10-speed bikes, and I had to have one. So my parents bought me a blue one, and yeah, it just wasn't the same as a BMX style bike. And I honestly didn't ride it that often, unfortunately. I feel like a heel now that they bought it for me. Probably, was a pretty penny for them, and I didn't, appreciate it. I mean, I kind of, like I said, I feel like a heel now about that. But I also remember, I think it was before or after my Thunder. I think my Thunder got rusted out, and my dad, because we didn't have a lot of money, built me a bike. He found parts, cleaned them up, built it for me. And in my other stories, I've mentioned that in front of our house we had a huge bush that was my little HQ for hiding out. Well, that's where I would park my bike. It was hidden there. We were off the main road. No big deal. But one night, someone stole that bike. A handmade bike, not a name brand, nothing fancy, and they stole it right from our front porch. I mean, And like I said, we weren't right on the street. They had to be really looking and really desperate to steal something. But yeah, I think after that I got my 10-speed bike, and I didn't ride it that much, like I said. And I don't want to, there had to be a transitional bike in there somewhere before mountain bikes, because I remember I got a mountain bike in high school, and I was a freshman, and my parents were very much like, this is the last bike we're ever buying you, so you need to take good care of it. And I did. I mean, it was white, it had like gray stripes up and down it. Great bike. I mean, I loved it. Rode everywhere. I mean, I was a freshman in high school. You would think I'd be more concerned with getting my license and everything, but nope, I was just content riding my bike. I would ride it up to a buddy's house that lived probably half mile away, and then we would join up and go to the arcade. And at that time, we were sinking quarters left and right in Street Fighter. And yeah, I apologize now. Some of these stories are going to bounce around because I'm getting ready to go back in time yet again here for a second. But I mean, I took care of that bike, I rode it, and it was the last bike I've ever been on, because first day of summer of freshman year going into sophomore year, I was riding down an alley, and I stopped and I looked both ways, and there was a car all the way down the street, all the way down. And I thought, well, I can make it. Unfortunately, that car was speeding, so when I got halfway across the street, boom, I got whacked. I got hit by the car. And I remember flying up through the air, and there were trees there, and I just remember in slow motion seeing the leaves and the light filtering through them before I hit the concrete. Fractured my ankle because that came down, boom, right on the concrete. Like I flipped, and then it came down, fractured it. And the funny thing is, the local cops in our town were more mad at me than this woman, because when the cops finally showed up, she was like, I'm going to be late getting back from work for my lunch break. And he's like, okay, go ahead. Now you, mister, tell us what happened. And of course, I'm in shock, I'm in pain, and this woman just got to walk away scot-free, no problem. And yeah, for a while there, not to sound like I'm weak or nothing, but I had nightmares and stuff of getting hit by cars, because that was pretty traumatic. But anyway, like I said, now we're going to step back in time here for a second and talk about an arcade. And I plan on doing some sentimental episodes in the future just about arcades in the 80s and the 90s. But the first arcade I remember ever going to was on my bike. It was down the street from the White's Bicycles, which was on Main Street. And I remember going into this arcade. I'll skip all the details for that episode for the future, but arcades and bikes just kind of went hand in hand for me, because the shopping center near my house also had an arcade, and when I was old enough to go there, I rode my bike there all the time. Rode my bike to the shopping center, walked around, checked out the different shops. And even though I said my bike was stolen from my front yard, you weren't afraid of just leaving your bike parked out in front of a store and going in. I mean, bikes would be there for however long I was in an arcade, or in the Ames, or in the it was a card store that sold books and comics, so I'd be looking at magazines and comics, and my bike would just be there on the sidewalk. How times have changed. I mean, I'm sure you can still trust people, but yeah, I mean, it's just something as you get older, or just the day and age we live in, you just don't trust people the way you used to. anyway, I know this episode is probably super boring, but like I said, I've been thinking about bikes recently. Like I said, kids are all out in the neighborhood riding, and I've been remembering times on my bike, riding around that graveyard, riding up and down that hill, riding up and down Main Street. I mean, those were the informative years for me, and probably for all of you too. I mean, I'm sure a lot of you out there spent a lot of time on bikes as well. Excuse me, getting a little verklempt. And I mean, that was just, like I said, it's still going on today, which is awesome. But shows like Stranger Things and stuff where you see the kids on the bikes going out and people are like, this wasn't real. Yes, it was real. We were just left to our own devices on our bikes. We had freedom. I mean, I can honestly say I will not extend that kind of freedom to my kids. I mean, it makes me sound like a jerk saying it out loud, but I mean, even though I haven't been on a bike since forever, I would gladly buy a bike just to ride with my kids so they're not alone and we're all just a family having a good time. Maybe I will do that, try to get them more accustomed to their bikes, get them off their scooters. But like I said, two wheels having fun, hey, I have no problem with it. I mean, now they go up and down the street, I walk with them, they have a good time. But yeah, there's just something about that freedom of a bicycle. And anyway, I'm sorry this was boring. Sorry I'm talking probably a lot slower than usual, but I'm bathing in the memories. Yeah. I hope you all have some wonderful memories about your bikes, adventures that you went on. Please share them in the comments. I mean, I would love to hear them. But anyway, I have no idea how I'm going to title this because I don't want to mislead people and like, bikes of the 80s, whoa, because I did that with the motorcycle one, which was a list episode, but people got really bent out of shape because they weren't real bikes. I was talking about pop culture bikes. So I had to change the title of it to, pop culture bikes or whatever I did. But anyway, I'm just droning on and on and on. But I'm having fun talking to you all, and I hope you had fun too. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this episode. I apologize that it was a little boring. But anyway, if you did like it, give me a thumbs up. If you got something to say, please leave a comment. I love reading them, and I love getting back to everybody. And if you're new around here and you enjoyed this, or any of the episodes that YouTube is recommending down here, please hit subscribe. And if you hit that little bell icon, you'll be notified whenever there's a new episode. So anyway, until next time, thanks for watching. Keep being rad, and stay dorky.